Hello, welcome to 1921. I was prepared to do 2 or 3 diary entries today, but it turns out, even though they're short diary entries, they are packed with new people. We are not in Monte Carlo anymore, where Dimitri had a few friends and a few people that he got together with. We're back in Paris, and he's got a larger group of friends and acquaintances there, and he's appearing more on the social scene. And so the last diary entry we did, what was it? I think we went up to the 5th of January. Now we're skipping to the 15th of January, so there's probably one of these long intervals between the 5th and the 15th where he was writing many pages. And everything is disorganized because I haven't been working on this section of the diaries for a while. So I am going to go ahead with this big jump of 10 days because I'm doing this fairly informally, and I can always go back and fill in the blanks. But now we are, at any rate, back in Paris. It's the 15th of January, which is a Saturday. Dimitri's address at that time, his apartment was at 76 Rue Miromesnil. So if any of you happen to be in Paris, or you're going to Paris and you want to walk by and have a look at the place, do. And you can also find it on Google Maps, of course, and see a picture of it. Okay. I am just a nervous wreck today with all this noise. I love being at Schatzalp in the Alps, especially when it's closed, and I get lots of peace and quiet. Of course, it's my own dog that's making the racket. Okay, so I'm continuing here to do the summaries. So maybe I didn't even translate the long diary entry because it would have been full of mostly probably political observations at this point, with so much going on in Russia and the Civil War winding down. So this is a summary, which is why I thought I would do several diary entries today. But no, there are simply too many people. Okay, so my preference is definitely to do the full diary entries, but in lieu of going through all of my microfilm and that sort of thing, I'm just going to go forward with this. All right. So, summarizing. Golevsky came in the morning with news about Russia. Dimitri praised his ability to gather it. Duke! Sorry. Okay, Dimitri had lunch with Maria, then went with Maybelle and Axel Witchfield to Paul's house, so Grand Duke Paul's old house that he bought. We remember, if you're following along in the 1906 diary entries, Paul had bought this house in 1906, and Dimitri and Maria had found out about it and were very discouraged because it meant to them that their father would be settling down permanently in Paris, even though the Tsar was sort of loosening the restrictions on him coming to Russia. Okay, so Dimitri goes with Maybelle and Axel Witchfeld to see Paul's house. They'd been asking to see it. And he'd gone previously with Linda and Cole Porter, so it was up for sale, and there were various people who were interested in buying it. Among them, Linda and Cole Porter. We'll talk about them a little later. So he'd gone with them to show it to them as well. And he refers to this time and says that it was the same this time as it had been with Linda and Cole, that it left him feeling, in his words, terribly downcast. And he remembered specifically in his words how prettily arranged the house had been before, meaning how well decorated and how nice and cozy and good furniture. And now he just found it, quoting him, ugly. That's the word he applies to it. And it's making him, every time he goes there, he comes away feeling depressed. So after he left the house with the Witchfeld, I don't know, they're Danish. He went with Axel to the Travelers Club, which was sort of his main hangout in Paris. It hadn't been in London, but in Paris, the Travelers Club. Clearly, he was a member, and that was where he went to gamble and to have nice, relaxing evenings. So he goes there with Axel, and it's afternoon, and they stay for tea. And then after tea, he goes for dinner at Arthur Kingsland's. And the other people who were there were the Count de la Salle and Henri Say, with his lady, Dimitri says, Marta Davelli, and there's a person whose name I can't make out, then Bob Luders, and the Contessa Martel, whose maiden name was Bardak. He concludes by saying that it was a nice evening, and they really didn't do anything, they just sat around, but it was nice. And afterwards, Dimitri and Bob went to Ciro, the popular Parisian restaurant. It was quite popular at that time with people on the social scenes. It still exists, so you can find it if you want to Google it, or if you're in Paris, it's still there. And Lyndon and Cole were also there, so it was kind of the same set that he'd been hanging out with earlier in the day. But on this occasion, unlike tea, it was, he found it very dull. And he went home, he writes, but it was very dull, and I went home and went to bed early. Okay, so yeah, he's kind of feeling a little down, probably because of his trip out to the house. And I'll show the picture again of Grand Duke Paul's house, and which is now a girls' school, I mentioned before. Okay, so let's talk about the people he mentions, and we can get some of these introductions out of the way, and then we can not be slowed down by them later. So the first person he mentions who came to see him in the morning was Golevsky. He refers to him, and Golevsky, so this is his typical practice of referring to people in his diaries by only their surname. And I'm guessing he wasn't doing that in person. So this was a major general in the Russian army, the pre-revolutionary Russian army. His initials were NL, and he had been, interestingly, the military attaché to the U.S. during the war. And in exile, he ended up founding a Russian monarchist group. I think it was fairly short-lived, but it's the group that would bring Dimitri to Berlin in a few months' time after this diary was written, and would greet him kind of as the conquering hero, as the possible Tsar to be. But anyway, he's very frequently mentioned in the diaries, and when it comes to the political scene, the émigré scene, not the social scene, he is quite an important figure in émigré circles in France and in Dimitri's life. So in 1919, in fact, he had an interesting conversation not only with Dimitri but with Maria about how there should be political agitation with the Tsarist troops in Russia. So the Civil War was at its height, and Dimitri agreed with Golevsky that they needed to put Orthodox religion to the fore and they were frustrated that Kolchak and Denikin and Wrangel and the other leaders weren't doing that. But I think, thank God they weren't doing that, because there were a lot of atrocities being committed by both sides, by the Reds, but also by the Tsarist troops. And you certainly don't want that sort of thing to be connected to your church. You know, I think that's going on in Russia now, and it's very, very unfortunate that the church would and the patriarch would allow that to happen. So anyway, yeah, maybe it would have been a difference, maybe made a difference, maybe they could have rallied more peasants to the cause, but yeah, it wasn't going to turn the tide, and it just all around would have been a bad idea. But anyway, back to Galeevsky, he would end up being arrested by the Nazis in 1941, and there were a lot of arrests in France. I shouldn't necessarily say the Nazis, because it was during the occupation, of course, but it was by the French authorities. And Dimitri's cousin, Grand Duke Andrei's son, was one of the arrestees, and Dimitri's friend and political crony, Kazanbek, the founder of the Young Russia Party, was also one of the arrestees, so I think he was arrested earlier, and Galeevsky not until 1941. And at the time that Kazanbek was arrested and Vladimir Krasinski, Dmitri was really freaked out, not surprisingly. He was at Schatzalp at the time, and he was, hoping that his health would be restored and he would be able to go back to Paris, but it began to seem like more and more of a bad idea because of these arrests of men who were politically active in emigre politics, pro-Russian, anti-German emigre politics. And so, Galeevsky ended up being held for a year and a half, and then freed, so he would have been still imprisoned at the time that Dmitri died in March 1942. All right, so that is the political part of this. Now we go on to the social part of this, and we meet a husband and wife, a Danish husband and wife. Actually, the wife is American. The husband is from a prominent Danish family, and like Galeevsky, he has a foot in the diplomatic world. In fact, he is a diplomat, and he was the attaché to the Danish legation in London. So Dmitri knew the Wichfelds. I have the spelling Wichfeld. They were Danish, and I'm not pronouncing it correctly, even by, I guess, the German pronunciation would be Wichfeld, something like that. So anyway, Axel was a good friend of Dimitri's. He was very close in age. He was only 2 years older than Dmitri, and they got to know each other and became close in London in 1919 and 1920. And Maybelle was, as I said, an American woman, and her first name is spelled Maybelle. The name Mabel was very popular at that time, judging from Dimitri's diaries. There are lots of women named Mabel, but in her case, it was Maybelle, I guess. And so there's one member of the family who's missing in this instance, who Dmitri spent a lot of time with, and I even wonder if they were a little bit of an item in London. And this is another Wichfeld by marriage, and her name was Monica, and her husband appears not to have been on the scene in London. He seems to be missing at that time. And Monica was a very, very interesting person. She was a politically active person, both in Irish politics, although she wasn't Irish, and was she? Okay, I'll have to return to that. And then she, during the Second World War, she joined the Danish resistance, and was arrested and was brought to Germany, and she ended up dying of tuberculosis, but not in a nice sanatorium like Dmitri. In her case, it was probably in a concentration camp. And there's been a biography written about her. Actually, I haven't read it yet. I need to read it to see if Dmitri is mentioned and learn a little bit more. And there's another very interesting work. I don't know if it's fair to her, but the name of this other book that I also haven't read yet is, what is it called? The Historical Dictionary of Sexpionage. Okay, so it's not focusing on Monica, but she's one of the people apparently who engaged in what this author calls sexpionage. Boy, that's horrible. As portmanteau words go, that is horrible. So using sex in the service of espionage. All right. So I hope I can find that. I'm quite curious. So, and Axel, I should say, was a member of the St. James's Club in London, so he was well established in upper-class circles there in London. All right, so we'll see how much the Wichfelds figure in the 1921 diary as opposed to the 1919 and 1920 diaries. Well, now, even more on the social scene, we have Count Antoine de la Sala. I have nothing to say about him except for I know he was a friend of Proust's, and I believe he was an older man in his 70s, and Dmitri had met a Countess de la Sala in Cairo when he was trying to make it to Western Europe after the revolution, and he just thought she was wonderful. She was about 75, I think, and he wrote in his diary at that time that she was one of the nicest, warmest people he'd ever met. And I do not know if she was the wife of Antoine, but she doesn't appear to be. Maybe she wasn't. Maybe she was mother or something, because he doesn't mention her after he leaves Cairo. She doesn't appear to be in Paris, but Antoine definitely is. And whatever age he was a good friend of Dimitri's, and I need to find more out about him. Henri Say, so that surname is spelled S-E with the accent over the E. I don't know who he was. With his lady, I don't know who she was. Bob Luders, again, like the Wichfelds, was a very close friend of Dimitri's, one of his closest friends. They spent a lot of time together in London, and they continued that in Paris. And I know Ed and I exchanged some emails about Bob, and Ed ended up finding out a lot of information about him. And I can't for the life of me find that information that he sent me. So Ed, if you're watching this, please resend me that. But Bob is a very close friend, and he and Dmitri, it's the closest thing that Dmitri seems to have to a pal that he spends time with. Okay, Marta Dovelli. Let's put her off for just a minute, and let me say that I don't know who Contessa Martel was with the maiden name of Bardak. There's another, a Bardak who was clearly a relation of hers, a male Bardak who's mentioned in the diaries, but I didn't look him up. Okay, I don't know. Again, this is a member of apparently the French aristocracy that I don't know anything about, and I should be able to find information about him. I just don't have time as I'm going through these right now to do a lot of research. So Marta Dovelli. Are you excited? Because if you know Coco Chanel, then you know Marta Dovelli. She was an opera singer, and she apparently famously claimed to have had an affair with Dmitri, and then she passed him off to Coco and said, well, it's great fun, but he's expensive. If you're going to have him as your kept man, he's going to cost you a pretty penny. So that was kind of insulting, but I don't see in his diaries that they were really, and I don't know. I mean, they might well have, hopped into bed together, but I don't really get that there was anything like an affair. Okay, but hold that thought, we'll see. So this is at any rate the herald of Coco Chanel. So the official start of this 1921 affair with Coco Chanel will be beginning within days. So definitely stay tuned for that. That will be quite a ride that we'll have with Dimitri and Coco, and we'll be there from the very beginning. Okay, and finally, Cole and Linda Porter. Interesting people. Cole Porter, of course, the famous songwriter, and huge on the social scene, loved to party, you could say, in modern parlance, and loved to have these huge, very ornate, very fancy, very decadent parties all over Europe, well, at least in Italy and in France and who knows where else. And his wife, Dimitri, is primarily interested in his wife, and I'm not insinuating anything by that. He knew her before she was Mrs. Porter. She was an American woman, and apparently he got to know her quite well before the war, and he really adored her. She's another person that he talks about as being such a kind person, such a warm person, so supportive of him, and he's a little sad when she marries Cole, although he certainly never had apparently any designs on her himself. She'd been in a really horrible, abusive marriage. I think her maiden name was Lee, and then she'd married an American named Thomas, who was just horrible to her. And so Dimitri in his diaries calls her Linda Thomas. Sometimes even after she's married to Cole, he still calls her Linda Thomas. And she was a person who was instrumental in introducing him to something that would remain a part of his life till the very end, which was New Thought, philosophy, or spirituality. So we'll have to get into that later. Cole, of course, was famously a gay man, not bisexual, just very, very clearly and openly gay. And Linda, after her horrible experience with her husband, maybe just was done with all that. But she and Cole Porter seem to have had an excellent marriage. And if she was the kind of person that Dimitri describes her as being, then I can understand that. You know, they supported each other, they were there for each other, Linda and Cole, that is. Okay, so they will continue to be important in the diaries. And I think that is everything. So definitely come back. The next diary entry will be the 16th. And which one is it where Coco is they finally get together? That is the 22nd. So we're coming up fast on that. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.